history has shown me that you have to be patient, and sometimes it's painful, and sometimes you doubt yourself, and sometimes the feedback loops are not as fast as you want them to be, but it's just a game I'd rather play, and I think it's a better strategy.
You're listening to the Real Returns podcast, where we learn how real investments can make a real impact. Join your hosts, Andrew and Dan, as they share stories and interview business leaders on how real estate and other forms of investment can create meaningful change for individuals and communities around the world.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Real Returns podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Reichert. I've got my co-host, Dan the Man Croce. Dan, how are we doing over there?
Great, man. I'm excited for today's interview. I got to be honest, it's basketball season. I got hoops on the brain. And I happen to know that our guest today is a basketball fan as well. So I was thinking, I'm coaching my son's 5 and 6-year-old team right now. And some of the guys said to me this week, they said, "Hey, coach, why doesn't Pittsburgh have a professional basketball team?" You know what the answer was?
What's the answer?
Because then Philadelphia wouldn't be better than anything at us at all. Right. So I just,
boo.
Sorry, Andrew. Sorry. No, but another one for you though. What's the difference between Charles Barkley and a tree? Do you know?
Charles Barkley and a tree.
A tree has rings. A tree has
ouch,
rings.
ouch.
Hi, Sixers fans. No.
Sheesh, low blows.
Hey, though, all seriousness, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. This is with someone who's a really special person that I've gotten to know over the years. I'll mention from the outset, he's actually someone who's invested with Burgo. But in my first probably 3 or 4 calls getting to know him, where I was trying to get him to invest in Burgo, I'd hang up the phone every time and realize I just spent 45 minutes talking about myself, letting him get to know me, because he's someone who invests in people and he's just soul of the earth kind of guy who wants to bring the best out of people. Without further ado, I will have you introduce our guest today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have Denny Boyle on the show. He's got a really interesting career spanning 20 years, starting at PwC and then over at Silicon Valley Bank, which I'm sure he'd love to talk a little bit about, tell some stories. And then it really has moved into executive and leadership coaching recently, which, to your point, Dan, he knows how to ask good questions and listen well. And I think it's really a great fit, creating this Balsam Lane coaching, and it really seems to be right in his wheelhouse. So Denny, could you just tell us a little bit about your story and what you're doing right now?
Sure, of course. And thank you guys for having me. Excited to be on. This is a little different because I am usually the one asking the questions. So just happy to be here. Thank you guys. Yeah, so as far as my story, so similar to you guys, born and raised in Pittsburgh, grew up in Wexford, went to North Allegheny, and my folks are still there. My sister lives in Gibsonia, so I get back a lot, which I'd love to. And, professionally, I started, as you mentioned, Andrew, at PwC. I would say coming out of college, zero clue what I wanted to do, studied all kinds of stuff, ranging from business to history. Worked at PwC for a couple of years, learned what it was like to not love your job or be good at your job. So that didn't last long, but made a bunch of great friends, and then found Silicon Valley Bank, which for me was family and home for almost, 16, 17 years until late last year, where I was always in market on the business development side, underwriting, and originally got my start in Philadelphia, where I covered Pittsburgh for SVB. And I knew of Dan. I think I might have been trying to get Dan's fund to bank with us back in the day, to no avail. And then you were the CFO or the VP of Finance.
Maybe it was my call.
But anyway, as I continued to grow up through SVB, had the chance to go to London to help scale out our operations once we got our charter there, and then was asked in 2013 to move my family out to the Valley to start the bank's Fintech practice. And that was the biggest opportunity, the most rewarding, I would say, until now, part of my career, where I was just really stretched in all kinds of ways, got to build a team from scratch, approach a market opportunity that was pretty nascent. And I think the timing was great. I was able to do that from Palo Alto for the first couple of years. And a big part of my story is family, where my wife and I have been married for almost 16 years. We've got 3 kids. My daughter will be 14 this weekend. Middle guy's almost 12, and my little guy's 9. But as my middle guy was growing up out there, we found out that he was on the autism spectrum. Some things happened as he was growing, and we realized as he was about to head into kindergarten, that's not where we needed to be. We kind of looked all over the country for where that place was, and we found Princeton, New Jersey, to just be a great place for us to be from a community perspective, schooling, and just everything we desperately needed as a family. So continued to scale out the fintech practice from New York, made it a national practice until that got to a point where I thought it was better that somebody lead than me. And so transitioned that business and moved over to SVB Capital to help in leading some of our early stage investing, predominantly in fintech, just because of my experience there. And then I would say somewhere along that line, in my short time investing, it was a tale of two markets. I would say the first half was the kind of post Zoom deal COVID era where just, deals were happening in hours, relationships were not valued. I mean, it was quite a transactional environment. And then it quickly changed to, turning the faucet off, and in a really challenging environment. And in that time period, that's probably a word will come up to handful of times in this conversation, as I really found that I was out of alignment in as far as, how I was spending my time, what I wanted to do. My energy levels were really low, and realized that I needed to make a change. And SVB supported me through that and gave me some time and said, come back and let us know what you want to do here, if anything. And I kind of went into the abyss, went deep, and tried to really understand who I was at that point in time and what I wanted to do, how I wanted to spend the second half of my career, if it is that. And that's when I came onto coaching. It's, as I'm sure as you guys have scaled Burgo, you realize, early on it's execution, and, you're kind of wearing tons of hats. And then if you're successful and build a big team, it moves to a lot of mentoring and coaching and leading from behind. And that became the most rewarding parts of my day, where I got the most energy. What I just absolutely love to do, and seeing other people succeed was better than anything that I could have done on my own. And said, let's make a go of this. So the goal was part-time to build a program internally with SVB, with the ability to have my own practice outside. But the events of last March made that an impossibility. So I'm now, running Balsam Lane coaching on my own outside full time, but thankfully get to work with as clients many of my old dear friends and colleagues in this capacity.
Denny, as I understand, your calendar is pretty much full, and I'm not the least bit surprised that it took basically no time for you to have a full book business. But can you talk a little bit about, at the core, this podcast and the things we like to talk about are impact and investing for impact. For us, the most logical expression of that is deploying capital into affordable workforce housing. And for you, for a long time, that meant thinking about capital deployment into technology and financial technology and how that can impact and change the world. And today, I suppose that means thinking about sort of deploying yourself into high potential people. So tell us a little bit, just, I guess, throughout the narrative of your career and then your expression today, how do you think about investing for impact?
Yeah, it's hard to separate the two. I mean, when I think of investing, it could be investing for profit. It could be giving, and that could be dollars, that could be time, or could just be investing the time that I want to spend. And I would say the way that I think about it is going back to that kind of magic word, is all about alignment. And it's really trying to understand, you kind of got to go deep first on yourself. Like, what's really important to me? Like, what do I give a shit about? Like, what, if it's not, if a value is stepped on, or if it's not being honored, like what really lights me up and triggers me. And then also, that's the negative example, but when you're in flow, what really gets me going? What gives me tons of energy? And I would say, we still invest, and, whether it's what I used to do, or whether it's, trying to figure out if someone's a good fit as a client, it's really understanding what's important to them. And then you look at, those two and say, how much, do we just have a circle? Do we have two separate circles, or do we have, a Venn diagram with some really good overlap between the two of us? And I try to look through it through that lens. I try to look through almost all decisions I make through that lens. I'd say one thing that informs that is, it's rare that most relationships start in wartime, or that start from a really, tense perspective, unless you're like a turnaround person or something like that, right? or an attorney in certain situations. So you tend to start in peacetime. I just find that doing that upfront work to focus on the alignment just sets an amazing foundation for when like the inevitable stuff comes up, because it's not a straight line that we travel on. And I just think that foundation just makes life a hell of a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah. Denny, I'm curious. You mentioned you felt like you were out of alignment in a previous position. What did that feel like? Like, how did you know that you were out of alignment? What is this sort of the manifestation of that?
I think if you were to Google what are classic symptoms of burnout, like I felt like it was talking to me. It felt lack of focus, lack of energy, irritability. And for someone that like, I don't, thankfully am an optimist, and I haven't had too many bad days in my life, and it's not hard for me personally to draw energy. And it felt like it was challenging. I would start 10 emails, start reading 10 articles, and finish, maybe one of them within the hour. And I would say that is how it manifested. I really just struggled to have the focus to complete whatever I was working on. And that was new for me.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Denny, I love the word that you use, alignment, and thinking about, how you want to deploy yourself or where you want to spend energy or capital and trying to sort of move the needle. What are some of those things that you do to try to identify whether or not the alignment's there? And I suppose maybe for you, someone who's kind of got this natural gifting as a coach, maybe you're able to ask great questions that kind of bring some things to the surface, or I don't know. But, for us and our audience, we do think about this a lot in terms of trying to identify capital deployment opportunities and ensuring that where we put the next incremental dollar is going to make the kind of impact that we want it to have. But so how do you even start? And when you're in a first sort of intake conversation, or when you're looking at a new investment opportunity, I know you do all kinds of private investing and sort of, unique, you take your own unique approach to how you think about capital deployment. So how do you start?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with just a curiosity in general, and then deep listening combined with that curiosity. And when I'm asking those questions, it's about really trying to understand like what, whoever, whether it's a fund, whether it's you guys, whether it's, a potential future client, what makes these people tick, or what motivates them, or what, like, and you can notice that in an answer that might be, I mean, we've all interviewed and hired people, you can tell when an answer is like, this is what I think I'm supposed to say, versus like, oh my gosh, I'm leaning forward. This is what I'm saying. I'm talking fast. I'm energetic. I'm in it. You can understand what really truly drives people. And then, when it comes to alignment and, where the overlap of those circles are, it's like, well, do I care about that? Because if I don't, but a good example, I mean, when I invest, I love to have great returns, but I care about winning as much, or actually less than I care about success, right? And doing it the right way. And if I get glimpses of somebody that maybe cares about that quite differently, maybe it's an end and they can justify any means to get to that end, then I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure that's a teammate I want or a game I want to play. So it's listening for those things of like, when do they, when are they authentic? When are they not? What are they authentic about? And then how does that resonate with like the things that, the way that I would answer those kinds of questions?
If I may, I'll go a little bit deeper and off script here. And if you don't have a great answer, that's okay. But I'm curious. I think for all of us, if we want to be as aligned as we possibly can in the way we go about our lives and deploying our own energy and capital, we have to do that preliminary work of making sense of what it is that we want to be aligned with. And so how have you gone about sort of clarifying that for yourself? Is it something that's static? Does it change over time? And yeah, I suppose, how do you identify that sort of consistency for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, one, I think the process, and unless I find a way to continually improve on it, is roughly the same. The answers are always changing. I'm happy and very comfortable with them always changing, because I think if we're not changing throughout this journey, it's going to be a pretty boring ride, right? And so the advice I always used to give was advice my dad gave me when I was trying to figure out like what major to be on. It's just like as simple as what do you like? What are you uniquely good at? And when it comes to careers, what pays the bills? You got to answer the question of what your enough is and like what your financial goals are, but what pays the bills? That evolved into maybe one more circle. I talk a lot in Venn diagrams, but one more circle in that, which is it kind of rounds out the Ikigai framework, the Japanese framework, which is like kind of ask this question to myself and others in different ways, but like, what does the world need? Or, a different way that I think about it is what problems, when they get harder, do I feel even more driven to try to solve? And if you can think of, because you tend to like what you're good at and you tend to be good at what you like. And if those things, not all fields, but it tends to lead to, some type of financial reward if you're good at something and love it. And then the big piece, which I think a lot of people, roughly our age, I don't know if it's like the midlife crisis thing or what, but start to ask themselves, like, what am I doing? Like, what's my purpose? Like, how do I want to think about this thing? And that fourth circle helps to answer that. Like, do I want a retirement party at 55 to say I've worked the same place for like 35 years and, I pushed paper and played politics for the last 20 years? Or do I want to like go out there and try to like, take some risks, do something, like help people? And that's the way I think about it. And I kind of put those questions, I put that simple diagram to people that are looking for some help to take stock.
Love that. Denny, in your current role, I am inspired by the way in which you find the way that you can move the needle the most for our world is by seeing other people at their best. Those are just from chatting with you beforehand. Those are some of your words. You want to see people operate at their absolute best. What are some signs that it's working in your process of investing in people and trying to get the most out of them? How can you tell that they're taking the steps towards going further on their journey?
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to a lot of those listening cues, I would say, is one. It's just like, where are their energy levels? Ask those same questions that you just asked me. How would they answer those questions? What kind of clarity do they have for themselves in answering those questions? I think another big tell is seeing, especially in coaching, like problem solving is, you're not solving problems for people. You're trying to teach them how to fish, right? You're trying to either create awareness or create frameworks for people to solve their own problems. I think one of the best forms of evidence is the energy that people have when that next problem comes up. And, early on, most people come to coaching because something's not right. If you're A+ in every category of your life, like you're probably not going to be seeking a coach for the most part, right? So people come to it for a reason. And at the beginning, they frequently feel stuck either in emotion or perspective or just what to do next to solve a problem. When I see the results of coaching work, it's when those future problems come up and you see the energy levels be very different. It's not stuck. It's like a front foot. This is a problem. Like, this thing happened. It's not all these attachments to like why it happened and poor me or whatever. It's like, well, this thing happened. What am I going to do about it? This is what I'm going to do about it. And then I'm like, well, I don't think you need to pay me to be your coach anymore because you've got this stuff. And I think that's really like the approach to and the energy, the attitude towards problem solving is one of the greatest manifestations.
Yeah, really cool. I'm curious because I know you're out there and I know you're very thoughtful about the actual art and craft of investing capital. So throughout your career, I'm curious whether this is something from life at SVB or something from just, being out there and looking at private opportunities. What sticks out to you as one of the more meaningful ways to actually directly invest capital in a way that for you is aligned that can make the world better?
One of the ways.
Sorry, that's
There's
a tough one.
Yeah, and it's a little different because my first 15 years at SVB was debt, not necessarily equity, right? And I would say early on, I mean, when you go through credit training, you learn about the 5 C's. I could probably rattle off a couple. I'm not even going to try, but the only one that I really cared about, because thankfully I had a fantastic track record of getting repaid through, all kinds of situations when startups are trying to do things that have never been done. I mean, the likelihood of success is quite small, but character was the only C that mattered. And people that cared about, they cared about your success as much as theirs was something that truly mattered. That carries through to equity in a major way. But I think something that I think about, that if I think about anybody that I've ever invested in, and I did it for all the right reasons, and I ran like a process that I'm proud of, it's just like the overarching theme is just playing the long game.
I love that.
Yeah. Anytime I've invested in people that don't, and there haven't been many, like I get what I pay for. But when you look at people, I mean, if I think, not just you guys, but I'm in a couple other venture firms, the venture firms that we're invested in now, their deployment in 2021 was next to nothing. They did not play the game that was on the field. They looked at this, thought for themselves, and said, this is silly, and I have a fiduciary responsibility to my LPs, and I'm aligned with this as well. And, they were there to play the long game, not to make a quick turn because the market was red hot. And I would say that's just really, because history has shown me that like the long game, you have to be patient, and sometimes it's painful, and sometimes you doubt yourself, and sometimes the feedback loops are not as fast as you want them to be, but it's just a game I'd rather play, and I think it's a better strategy.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Denny. Nothing that you have said today has surprised me too terribly much, because you're a very consistent, integrated person. So I really appreciate that. But we have gotten a chance to know a little bit of you from the standpoint of kind of how you view your work and the investment landscape. Andrew is going to have a little fun letting us get to know you on the personal side.
Let's do it.
Right.
So, Denny, you've obviously had lots of wins in your life, I'm sure personally and professionally, but what would you say is your biggest win?
Yeah, this is easy. I'm guessing an answer you guys get a lot with my family. I mean, it starts with Danielle. Like she's my roommate first. We're now married almost 16 years, our kids, but also, having terrific parents, having an amazing sister. Get a little choked on it, but having like hit the in-law lottery, which I know like not everybody does, but having my wife's family be, in my eyes as amazing as mine is no brainer.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, I hear 3 kids is the magic number. So I
tell Dan that. Too late to tell
Dan overshot. But yeah, the in-law lottery sounds good. I got in-law bankruptcy on my end. So no, I'm kidding. Just in case
I know you're in-laws.
Cut that.
Listening.
They're good people.
They're good people. Favorite movie?
This also feels a little cliche, but it's Good Will Hunting.
Oh, nice.
Good Will Hunting. And the reason is because I can't, at being a relationship guy, I cannot think of a relationship in any movie that I love more than the one between Matt Damon and Robin Williams. I think it is the best.
Yeah, that checks out. That's really good. How about a favorite food of yours?
Even though you wouldn't guess it by my last name, it's not going to be any Irish food, but my meal, like my birthday meal, is really good bolognese, like all the different kinds of meat in bolognese, followed by tiramisu.
Oh man, sounds good. Glass of wine to pair
glass
with
of wine with maybe a little Four Roses single barrel after.
Oh man, killing it. Sounds amazing. What's the current way in which you're growing, either personally or professionally? What's kind of a current growth edge for you?
I would say the biggest, something that's been helpful over the years has always been perspective. And I think, honestly, my son, who's on the spectrum, helped with that. He made any work problem seem like, I was like, whatever. I don't care. This doesn't matter. This is so small. He was like my constant, people go to space and they look down and they're like, I'm looking at the earth and I care, like the things that are bothering me, I care about that. He was my constant reminder of what matters. So I'd say perspective has always been one I always just like, I'm dogmatic about making sure that I am checking that. The second piece is just routines and habits. And it was something I struggled with having, I work probably 60, 70 hours a week for 15, 18 years. To not be working that much or traveling that much, it's easier to get into routines and habits. And I think just having like really good structure in your life and really strong routines and habits just creates compounding effects.
So good. And honestly, both of those, both perspective and routines, at least from my perspective, feel like lifelong journeys. Like you've never arrived, right?
No, but
It's
just
like
enjoy
a
it. Right?
constant battle. So
Yep.
those are so good. What's some like really good content, A+ content you're taking in these days, books, podcasts, whatever it is? What are you using to kind of learn and grow yourself?
Yeah. I think to start, what helps with A+ content is to take away like F content.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
good.
maybe a year or two ago, I deleted all Twitter, Instagram, Facebook from my phone. So I have to be on my laptop if I'm going to see any of those platforms. And like, man, like I don't miss anything. I don't miss, that to me is just, I could stop there for one, but then as far as podcasts, I like always the hosts that are really focused on just different mental models. And so I've always just been a huge fan, and I haven't got off the train for what Shane Parrish does at the Knowledge Project. I just think it is incredible, even though it says invest like the best, what Patrick O'Shaughnessy does with invest like the best, because it's just so much broader than just investing. Those have been, if I look back over the last 5 years, like dominant, probably 90% of my podcast listens, I would say. Then other content, I don't know. I believe that the things that have been around for the longest have probably been around the longest for a reason. And I like old stuff, and I'm really big into stoicism. A lot of the stuff that Ryan Holiday puts out, I think is really good. I read the Daily Stoic, the Daily Dad, and meditations every morning as part of those habits.
Yeah.
I just think like, if it's lasted this long, there's a reason. And, can't say the same thing for your Twitter feed. Right?
Yeah. Ain't that the truth? Yeah. You can never go wrong with that timeless wisdom. Well, this was awesome. I really enjoyed the conversation. Love just learning about how you think of impact, both in investing in people, the leadership and the coaching that you're doing, and also just this concept of alignment. What does alignment look like in your investments? What does alignment look like in your job? Making sure that it's aligned with your core values and what you care most deeply about. I learned a ton. Denny, just before we wrap, how can folks connect with you if they maybe want to interested in your coaching or they just want to connect with you? What's the best way to do so?
I think LinkedIn is the easiest. That's one of the socials I haven't dropped. So LinkedIn is by far and away the easiest. Denny Boyle, spelled as it sounds. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Denny, for being on the show. Again, I learned a ton. I think our listeners got a lot of value here. And if anybody of our listeners want to connect with Denny, check him out on LinkedIn. Thanks again.
Thanks guys.
Denny.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Real Returns Podcast. We hope that you learned something new about how you can invest to make a lasting impact on those around you. Please be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts, leave us a review, and share about us on social media. We hope you will join us for our next episode, where we will be continuing the conversation around impactful real estate investing.